Some people are saying that the Copenhagen conference is the most important meeting that will take place in our lifetime.
This is Faith Complex, a dialogue about the entanglement of religion, politics and art.
Hello, my name is Jacques Berlinerblau of Georgetown University, and you're watching Faith Complex. Joining us today is Professor Katherine Marshall. Professor Marshall is Senior Fellow at the Berkley Center right here at Georgetown. She is also Executive Director of World Faiths Development Dialogue. Professor Marshall, welcome to Faith Complex.
Thank you.
Now, when it comes to the environment and religion, there are scads of things we could speak about, but I guess what we really should be concentrating on in terms of current events is the upcoming Copenhagen Conference. Tell us about the Copenhagen Conference. What's it about?
Some people are saying that the Copenhagen Conference is the most important meeting that will take place in our lifetime. And the reason is it's existential, it's about survival, it's about trying to do something about climate change. So it's one of a series of meetings, but one that has special importance that are under the aegis of the United Nations. But in this case, there also are at least 15,000 people from NGOs who are also converging on Copenhagen to try to change the mood, to try to galvanize action.
So where does climate change intersect with religion at the Copenhagen Conference?
Climate change and religion intersect at a whole set of levels. The one that people are focusing on most in Copenhagen is the moral responsibility, which many religious communities and leaders feel is a special role that religious communities play.
So like the creation care paradigm of the evangelicals, for example.
Yes, that is clearly one. The sense that humankind has been consumed by greed, materialism, has lost sight of the compact with creation from many different religious traditions, all the way from the Patriarch of Constantinople has been known as the Green Pope. And for many years, he's advocated care of the environment. There also are, the Catholic Church has a long record of statements and action on climate change. From indigenous traditions, the love of the earth, the Cochamama that you would find in the Andean tribes, to all the indigenous peoples who have a special guardianship of nature, all the way to the most senior religious leaders, at least in theory. This is a cause that unites them.
Are there any religious groups who, for theological reasons, are not interested in climate change and environmental concerns?
Yes, there are. There's a history of opposition, in fact, between the environmental groups and some religious groups, particularly some parts of the evangelical community. And theologically, it seems to turn around their questions about man's dominion and the right of man to do what is needed to benefit the humankind. What's interesting, though, is that clearly the younger generations of evangelicals are very different. And we are all, I think, impressed by how young people are deeply moved and deeply energized by the issues of the environment. And that's very much true of religious communities. And what we are seeing is an increasing intensity in this mobilization. And we've seen it in the lead up to Copenhagen with tremendous energy and activity on Facebook, the 360 movement, tick, 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 all sorts of different efforts to mobilize the conscience, but even more the action.
And if you want to get action on this, who do you have to speak to? Is it the governments? Is it the corporations? Is it the average everyday carbon-using footprint person? Who do you have to direct the message to?
All of the above. One sense, though, what I'm hearing recently is that governments are pretty well hopeless. So the idea that the Copenhagen conference is actually going to come out with a treaty to replace Kyoto, which is the idea. There's supposed to be a new treaty. It's looking less and less likely. So, the view of many religious communities is that we should not rely on governments, and that it is the mobilization of citizens and people in faith communities, as well as everyone else, who need to take the responsibility for doing what's necessary, which means reducing consumption, which means encouraging and impelling the move towards sustainable energy sources and so forth.
All right, here's a quote from Ban Ki-moon. Faith groups run more than half of the world's schools, operate more weekly publications than all the secular press in the EU, control financial investments worth trillions, and own nearly 8% of habitable land on the planet. So I guess the question is, if faith groups were really committed to this, they sure could get a lot done, right?
Right. That Ban Ki-moon made that comment at the recent Windsor Castle meeting, which was organized by the United Nations Development Program and the Alliance for Religions for Conservation. And the point he's trying to make, however questionable those numbers, is that the religious communities are enormous, that they have not been appreciated and not been engaged by most of those who are engaged in the environment.
Is this the coming trend, that these religious groups are really going to start concentrating on the environment?
There are many of the religious traditions that are actively involved, whether it's at the congregational level, whether it's in preaching and sermons, whether it's in what they teach in schools. It is important, though, to look, for example, at the Buddhist and the Hindu traditions, where it seems that the kinds of concerns with protection of the environment and man's relation to nature seems to be very deeply ingrained. And it is a passionate message that we have heard from people from the Vedic traditions for some time.
So it's easier to work on environmental issues outside of the orbit of monotheism, or is that too broad a generalization?
I wouldn't go that far.
You wouldn't touch that, or you wouldn't go that far?
I wouldn't go that far,
Okay.
because I think that the range between some people who've been on the absolute forefront of thinking about the climate change, environmental issues are within religious communities. And at the other extreme, you have people who are at the extreme of denial and are at the extreme of unease. But the question that you were asking, I think, is very important, which is, to what extent do they use this convening power, this mobilizing power, this energizing power to move forward? And that is behind a lot of the organizing for the Copenhagen meeting. The delegations of religious leaders are going, and they want to be part of the dialogue and the discourse on how we respond.